Scotland dominates the global conversation about the United Kingdom. Independence movements, North Sea oil, international influence. Wales? Most people barely know anything about it. But here's the strange part. For centuries, Wales was actually more important to England than Scotland ever was. So how did these two nations end up with completely opposite roles inside the UK? The answer is hidden in geography. Scotland and Wales, same island, same kingdom, same long history with England. Scotland is loud, Wales is quiet. Scotland pushes for independence, dominates global headlines, and built an international identity that stretches from New York to Sydney. Yet somehow Wales became almost invisible. And this is the part most people never hear about. Geographically, historically, and economically, Wales developed in almost the exact opposite way to Scotland. So why did two nations on the same island end up so different? Because once you look at the map, the story becomes much bigger than Wales and Scotland. It becomes a story about geography, resources, power, and how borders shape the fate of entire nations. And if you're interested in how geography quietly shapes global politics and economies, consider subscribing. This channel explores the hidden patterns behind the world map. Let's start with something most people don't notice. Let's look at the United Kingdom on a map. At first glance, Scotland and Wales seem quite similar. Both are mountainous, both resisted English expansion for centuries, both have their own language and cultural identity. But geography placed them in completely different strategic positions. Scotland sits at the top of the island, facing the North Sea and the Atlantic. That gave it something Wales never really had: access to the wider world. Scottish ports opened trade routes to Scandinavia, Northern Europe, and eventually the entire British Empire. Cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh became global hubs: shipbuilding, trade, finance. By the 19th century, Glasgow was known as the second city of the British Empire. Meanwhile, Wales faced in the opposite direction. Instead of opening outward, Wales faced inward, directly toward England. And that single geographical difference changed everything, because England didn't need to conquer Scotland immediately. But Wales sat directly on England's western border, and that made it impossible to ignore. The English crown began pushing into Wales as early as the 11th century. By the late 1200s, King Edward I launched a series of brutal campaigns to permanently conquer the region. Castles like Carnarvon, Conwy, and Harlech weren't just medieval architecture. They were military infrastructure designed to control Wales. In 1284, Wales was effectively absorbed into the English crown. Scotland, on the other hand, fought back. Famously, the wars of Scottish independence in the 13th and 14th centuries created something Wales never fully developed: a lasting political myth of resistance. William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, Bannockburn. Those stories became the foundation of a strong national identity. Scotland remained an independent kingdom for centuries longer. Wales didn't, and that early difference had massive consequences. Because while Scotland entered the United Kingdom through a political union in 1707, Wales had already been integrated into England for hundreds of years, legally, administratively, economically. By the time the modern UK formed, Wales was already deeply embedded inside England's system, and that shaped its future. But here's where the story takes an unprecedented turn, because in the 19th century, Wales suddenly became incredibly important, not politically, but economically. Under the ground, Wales had something Britain desperately needed: coal, huge amounts of it. South Wales became one of the largest coal-producing regions on Earth. The valleys around Cardiff, Swansea, and Merthyr Tydfil turned into industrial powerhouses. At its peak, the South Wales coalfield employed hundreds of thousands of workers. Cardiff briefly became the world's largest coal exporting port. In other words, Wales helped fuel the Industrial Revolution. But the key difference was this: Scotland developed diversified industries: shipbuilding, engineering, banking, universities. Wales became heavily dependent on a single resource: coal. And when your economy relies on one industry, the future becomes fragile. Because in the late 20th century, that entire system collapsed. Coal demand dropped, mines closed, industrial jobs disappeared. Entire Welsh communities were built around mines that suddenly vanished. Meanwhile, Scotland experienced a completely different economic shift. In the 1970s, something enormous was discovered in the North Sea: oil. North Sea oil transformed Scotland's economic potential almost overnight. Suddenly, Scotland controlled one of Europe's largest energy resources. And that changed the political conversation, because many Scots began asking a simple question: if Scotland has its own resources, why should it remain in the United Kingdom? This idea fueled the modern Scottish independence movement. Today, Scotland has its own parliament, a powerful national political identity, and a global cultural presence. Wales? The story evolved more quietly. Wales also gained its own parliament, now called the Senate, in 1999. But the push for independence has always been much smaller than in Scotland, partly because of economics, partly because of history, and partly because Wales has always been more closely connected to England. Look again at the map. The border between England and Wales is only about 260 kilometers long. But economically, culturally, and infrastructurally, the connection is extremely deep. Millions of people commute across that border every year. Major Welsh cities like Cardiff are tightly integrated with the English economy. Scotland, by contrast, sits much further away from England's economic core. Geography again. Distance creates political space, and political space allows stronger national movements to grow. But here's the real twist. Despite being quieter politically, Wales preserves something Scotland almost lost: its language. Welsh is one of the oldest living languages in Europe. For centuries, many believed it would disappear. Industrialization, English education policies, and economic migration nearly erased it. But in recent decades, something remarkable happened. Welsh made a comeback. Today, hundreds of thousands of people speak Welsh. Schools teach it, road signs display it, and the language became a symbol of cultural resilience. In a strange way, Wales protected its cultural identity while Scotland amplified its political identity. Opposite paths, same island. But the deeper story here is about geography. Scotland faced the world. Wales faced England. That difference shaped trade, war, identity, and politics for nearly 1,000 years. It influenced which industries developed, which resources mattered, and which political movements gained momentum. Two nations, one island, completely different trajectories. And yet both reveal something fascinating about the way geography shapes history. Because when you zoom out on the world map, patterns like this appear everywhere. Borders that change economies, mountains that divide cultures, coastlines that create global powers. Scotland and Wales are just one small example of a much bigger rule. Geography rarely decides everything, but it quietly pushes history in certain directions. And sometimes those directions create two completely opposite stories, right next to each other. If you look closely at the map, you start seeing these patterns everywhere, and once you see them, you can't really unsee them. If you enjoy exploring the hidden forces behind global borders, economies, and geopolitics, there are more videos on this channel that break down the surprising stories hidden in the world map.